Okay, so in today's video we're going to take a look at an actual pistol repair. So this particular pistol is one of my favourites. This is the Umarex Beretta M92A1, and I was using this obviously last week, and I had the trigger spring, or the trigger return spring, fail on me. So you can see here the trigger is obviously at the rear, and it won't obviously recover because the spring had broken. So I have the torsion spring here. So basically it's obviously failed, where you can see the one of the arms is snapped off. Hopefully you can see that in the camera. And I was looking to obviously get this this fixed, and I managed to obviously source some additional replacement springs. So I don't know if you can see those in the bag here. These are obviously the correct ones, which I've got from Bagnall and Kirkwood here in the UK. So those guys obviously shipped those out, and I'll put a link in the video description, obviously, of the website, and you can, if you have a similar issue, you can contact for them for some spares. So I was able to source those. So in this video I thought we'd do obviously a repair and strip it down, and obviously and get the replacement spring in. Now I've already stripped this down and obviously removed the spring, so I'm going to obviously just show in this video obviously me stripping it down again, and obviously get to the point where I can obviously fit the new spring. Okay, so let's do ahead and just remove the magazine, and obviously check, make sure everything's safe, everything's loaded in there. And you can see at the moment obviously it cocks fine. Obviously you've still got the trigger mechanism working, it's just it doesn't return. So when obviously you do a double action, you see and it just simply doesn't return. The spring is obviously it's been removed now, but it's just broken out. Okay, so what we do then is obviously let's go ahead and strip it down. So on this particular pistol you have a plunger here which you push in, and then you can rotate this cam to that position there, and then obviously you should be able to remove the slide. Can be a little stiff at times, but should come straight forward. And then you have your two pieces. So put the slide to one side. Now on this particular pistol you obviously have you can see the main hammer here, assembly. Now when you're stripping this down, I wouldn't recommend obviously messing with this. Don't try to cock it or anything, because you can have small little springs in here that ping out everywhere, and obviously then you'll be in a world of hurt trying to get that repaired. So what I typically do is obviously remove the actual pistol grips. Now again, on this particular one, on the fix, I discovered I didn't need to remove obviously both of them, but you do to actually get some parts out, but then I do recover the grip to make sure the springs stay in place. So I'll show you that when we start stripping it down. But again, you can see here obviously you've got the kind of main chassis of the pistol, and again sort of from the point of view of obviously the repair, we need to get into this housing here and obviously repair down in there. You can see obviously that small little pin that goes through, that's where the actual physical spring sits. Okay, so let's start stripping down. So let's have a flat bladed screwdriver and just remove the grip screws. Do that on both sides. So again, these are not very tight, you can should just be able to crack them and then spin them off. And once you've done that, you can then should be able to just lift off gently. If you just get a fingernail under there, you want to do this gently, because I'll show you why in a second. You can just lift that off. So there's your two pieces. So to put the grip to one side. Now what you have in here is there's a number of springs that obviously handle the kind of safety and also the trigger mechanism itself. Now you want to be careful here, because these can easily be dislodged, and obviously then they sort of ping off everywhere, and you've got to try and recover them. So what I typically do is remove what I need from here to get access to the trigger, but then put the pistol grip cover back on to make sure these stay in place. So what you need to do here is we need to essentially remove this bar. So to do that, you have a little retaining kind of section here, so that just literally just lifts off. It's just held in place. There's no kind of fastener for that. It's just obviously held on to this little lug here that then just obviously gets secured with the pistol grip. So we'll take that off, put that to one side, and in here now, so the only thing we need to remove here is this bar. So you can see this is the bar that obviously gets used as part of obviously when you pull the trigger, which obviously activates a hammer. Now again, don't go messing with obviously the hammer. Don't go try to cock it or anything like that, because these springs will all ping out, and you'll get into a state where you'll obviously have to recover those and obviously put all this back as was. What I also would recommend if you're new to this is take a photograph at each stage, so then at least you've got a picture of obviously how it all looks, so if it does come out you can put it back in the same manner. Okay, so to remove this, then you just want to get a flat blade screwdriver, just gently get underneath here. So it's a bit fiddly at times, but it just kind of, you just want to move it up a little bit to just get your hand under there. You can see there, I've just raised it, hopefully you can see that, and you just want to pull that out ever so gently. Now this spring is attached, so sorry, maybe beforehand, just put your finger on there and just remove that spring. It sits within a sort of like a little slot, and I'll bring this out. So this is the bar removed, and you see that spring just kind of just stays there. If I lay that down a second, the spring end itself sits on a little recess. You can see here. I don't know if you can see that clearly. There's a small little recess there. If I maybe get the blade of the screwdriver, there you can see it's kind of a little cut groove where that spring sits on. So that's obviously where you want to return that. So again, that obviously came out of this position. So you can see we've got the trigger here. Your bar would sit in there, and then this would obviously sit closely behind that, and then that spring would have to then be kind of retracted back and put underneath that main trigger bar. Okay, but we can leave that as is. Now this is the bit I mentioned, obviously you might want to put the pistol grip back on, because everything that you've got here now is all been removed. You don't need to worry about obviously getting into this. So just to make it easy for yourself, you want to just put the pistol grip back on that side, and just make sure you can fasten it down to keep those springs in place. So just going to go ahead and just reinsert this. Again, you don't have to do it up too tight, it's just obviously just to hold it in place. And you could just put one screw in there, but I'm going to make sure put both in so we don't lose them. Again, just essentially just put it in there so it doesn't come off. Okay, so far so good then. So now we've got obviously the trigger here, and it's obviously okay from the point of view of being able to access to that. So now we turn obviously the pistols around, and then we need to remove this, which is the slide lock. Now again, this is held by a spring. So what you typically do is you want to just sort of slide that out. It will slide out, and you can see here I've brought it out a little bit, but you've got a spring there, so just be very careful when you remove it, because the spring will come with it. And then you can obviously simply slide the bar out. So there's your slide lock. Let's put that to one side. Now this spring here is kind of, if you can see, it's got a little pin that sits into a hole there. So if I just put that back in, you'll notice that, you can see it on camera, there's a small little hole there. And if I can find that on camera, it sits in there. So it does actually retain the spring, but it will come out if it obviously pivots around. So you might want to just ensure that obviously you take that out to make sure it doesn't disappear anywhere. Put that to one side. Okay, so now then we obviously need to remove the main trigger pin itself, which you should be able to get from the other side. Now, oops, no, it just fell out. But you can, sometimes you might find with this particular one, you have this trigger pin here. Now this obviously has a cap on it. Now the cap side is a bit where the spring was housed on the trigger, sorry, the slide lock. So a slide lock side, obviously this is the side that has the pin for the trigger, which has the cap on it. So you need to remove it from the other side. Now this one, obviously, when I've taken it out before, obviously you can see it literally just slides straight out, but you may need to get a small little punch and obviously push that through, either a small screwdriver or a punch. You shouldn't have much force on there, but when it's brand new, you might find it's never been removed. It might be not so easy to slide out, but you can get that out relatively straightforward. Okay, so once you've done that, your trigger is kind of loose. Now this is the stage where I got kind of a little bit stuck on the first strip down. So I can see then there's a screw hole here, so you obviously need to remove that one. So let me just go ahead and grab my screwdriver set, which I failed to get through. So again, you just need to have a small kind of Phillips screwdriver, and then you should be able to remove this screw here. So it shouldn't be very tight. You can see straight away, I've taken this apart before, but it's not that tight. So you want to remove that screw, and then literally just get that out. Keep that side one safe. So that's that screw removed. Now here, I thought, okay, well this should be coming out now because I can't see any other way that this is fastened. And the only other thing that I thought was, and I'm not sure if you need to take it out, but we will take it out anyway, is the cam lock here for the slide. So that one you can just push that through. So you need to do sort of like just put your finger on there and just move it so it's around, so the whole cam is away from that pin, and then you should be able to just literally slide that out. So you can see here that just slides out. So that's the kind of cam lock for the slide. So again, so now you think, okay, well this should come out, but this is where I got stuck. So I initially couldn't understand how to get this out. It's loose, and you can hear it and see it's loose, but I couldn't kind of work out what the next step was. But then, after a bit of sort of like fiddling, I discovered that there's another screw hidden. So if you look in here, you can see that there's this metal kind of housing, but there's also a plastic part. All you have to do is just get your screwdriver in there and just gently, you have to be very gentle with this, and you can just slide it back. Proving to be a bit tricky today. Okay, there you go. So you can see I've slide that back and it reveals the screw under there. Hopefully you can see that on camera. So you just need to slide that back. You don't have to come all the way out, just enough to sort of like get access to the screw. And then again, similar to the previous screw, just loosen that off. And you should be able to get out. We lost the plastic housing as well, but again, that just sits in there, but you can just put that to one side if it comes out fully. So there's the screw, slightly longer than the previous one, so make sure you don't get those mixed up. So the other thing as well on this one is you do have the plunger for obviously removing for adjusting the cam. Now this sits in a housing and rotates. You don't need to remove this for this part. Oh, we do actually need to remove it. Sorry, I got that wrong. Okay, so let's just talk about that quickly. Okay, so if you notice down in there, there's a small little spacer there. So if you want to try and extract that, put that to one side, and then now you can obviously then remove the plunger here. So this plunger, which is the one that's obviously the indent plunger that we use to obviously remove the to obviously handle the cam lock for the slide, you can actually rotate that under your finger pressure. So what you want to do is you want to rotate that round. And then once you've done that, you should be able to find that you can, yeah, so at some point you can force it right through, so it just has a cam. And at that point, if you try to then lift out the housing, yeah, it just pops out on a spring. So you need to be a bit aware of that. So now if I lift up the housing here, and you can see we've got the spring that's in there. So just to go back, that was the spring for the plunger. So you can see here, and that's the one that obviously goes through this process. So this is the one where you have the spring here, but obviously that's handling that. So it's kind of a bit fiddly, but it's got like a, if you look in here, you can see that there's a stop kind of recess. So there's only so far that you can push it through. I don't know if you can see it on camera clearly, but you can only push a plunger through so far. So in that respect, you've got obviously this process where your plunger can be pushed in to a point, but you're going to need to ensure obviously that when you insert that, you put the spring on and you make sure it's over that slot. But we'll cover that when we put it back together. Okay, so once that's done, then it's a case of just obviously lifting out the trigger itself, and there you go. So here we have obviously the trigger mechanism, which we need to apply this new spring to. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and obviously get this spring out of the bag. So I purchased 4 of these, so I've got additional spares. So here's our spring. Now you notice that there's a slight difference here, that we have one side that has a kind of almost like an elbow on the part where it joins the spring, and then the other side is coming directly off the spring. Now if you take that with the example of the one that was broken, it looks like the kind of the arm that's got the slight elbow to it is the one that's snapped off. So this side here was the one that we lost. Okay, so essentially when this was obviously inserted, and now I did have a problem with this, with trying to work out the orientation because I didn't take note of that and took it out. Now if I remember rightly, when this was in here, the trigger was obviously positioned like this, and when I saw the spring it looked like it was actually physically set up like this. So it had the bar here. So I turn it around the other way. It looked to be something, if I can bend that over. So again, you can see on the trigger housing here, there is a slight, so let me just put that down a second. There's a slight notch in here, and that's where the other side of the spring was impacting on. Okay, so with the housing here, you'll notice obviously that I've put the spring on this way. You can notice that. So it has the shorter, smaller arm at the top here. So you can see that clearly, and then the arm that's obviously got the kind of elbow in it is obviously facing towards the trigger itself, where you would put your finger on the trigger. And obviously that's then on the this little bar that sits in the center here. So that's the kind of the way you need to orientate it. And then what happens is that this little elbow here on the spring will actually kind of rest inside here on this little edge. You can see there's like a little recess there. So what you do is you would literally then kind of insert the spring in this fashion, and you want to sort of obviously have a situation where it does take a bit of fiddly work to get in there, but you want to kind of align it so you're kind of getting close to that position. So hold it a bit closer to the camera, and then you literally need to kind of move the trigger around. And you can see here, obviously just trying to sort of get position on that. So you can see you need to have the little bar aligned with this side of the casing and also this side. So you need to kind of finesse this in a little bit. It can be a bit tricky. Once you get it in there, then you're good to go. So you see the bar there is flush, and on this side it's kind of flush, and you just probably push through a little bit. But now the trigger's kind of in there, and you see now that you've got a springiness on the trigger. So you've kind of, at this point, you've repaired your trigger. Now again, there's no pin here at the moment, so you need to make sure you're a bit careful this doesn't fall out, but ultimately that should trigger in place now. So you can see the spring down in there, hopefully, and then you can see here, the trigger is now coming back into position. Okay, so now we're pretty much ready for to reassemble. So what I'm going to do initially on this one is I'm just going to put a very small little bit of kind of lubrication on this spring, only a very small amount though. So what I typically do is just obviously apply that here. Now the reason I'm going to do this is I've had a problem with, obviously when I initially had this, the spring itself, and you want to be very liberal on how much you pass in here, is when I was pulling the trigger you could hear like a really sort of springy, crunchy sort of sound to this, which obviously I wanted to try to solve. So hopefully by putting a little bit of lube on there, that will just obviously mitigate that problem. Okay, so let's go ahead and reassemble then. So what we do now is obviously put this back into position here, so drop this back in, and kind of let that get lined up. So there you are, so that's lined up. And again, we need to also then return the little plunger that's used to swivel the cam to remove the slide. So we push that into the hole here, and again you have to kind of rotate this a little bit to get it to get it in there. So again, because obviously this It's a bit fiddly, but you have to kind of rotate it as you push it in. It will go through. It's just a case of having to find the slot. Can get a little bit annoying. You might just have to lift the housing out. You can see I lifted the housing up a little bit there, and now it's come through. And you see now it's operational. So you can see how that's rotated around. So it can be a bit fiddly. You might have to lift the housing, but once you've got that in place. And then we've got a cam here, so we want to obviously reinsert this. And you need to do this in a way that obviously doesn't catch with the pin. So again, taking that and insert that in, make sure it goes right the way through on both sides, and it's nice and flush there. So there you go, that's all good. So now we've kind of put that down, and we're going to push the pin through and put this back into the kind of cam unlock position that we had originally for our slide state. So just leave that there. Okay, so that's that part done. So now we need to take the trigger pin itself and obviously reinsert that. So again, remember the head of the trigger pin here goes through on the kind of cam release side. So you need to obviously, you want to again finesse this through, push that into place, make sure that that's good on the other side, nice and flush. Okay, we're pretty good there. Now we need to get the kind of spring that's used for the catch release, and again with the kind of hook side, make sure that goes. So again, you might have to play around with this a little bit. Do you want to try to hook this in? There's a small little hole here somewhere. Takes a bit of time to, a bit fiddly doing that here on camera. Okay, there she goes, you can see it now. And it slightly covers the pin a little bit, so you know when you've got it in place. Now, obviously this particular one, let's rest that there a second, because we need to reinsert the screws. So this is the smaller of the two screws, if you recall. So just position that in there, and then you can tighten that up. So again, you don't want to over tighten these, you just want to make sure that they're seated in there just right. Just nip it up, no more than that. And obviously now we need to obviously insert this the slide release. So this is the one where you're going to have to be a bit kind of fiddly here, because you need to get this underneath. If you can see here, this part of the spring needs to obviously be underneath on this little recess here. So if you watch what I do, I typically bring this forward, kind of want to angle it out a little bit if you can, and then you can put it onto the slide recess there. Oops, let's try that again. Can be a bit fiddly when you're first doing it. Okay, so you need obviously the main bar on the trigger slide release to go just in there. You just want to hold it just a little bit, because you need to obviously get that spring, which you can do with a screwdriver. Just lift that up out of the way, and then obviously you need to bring that back up and kind of, it's not easy to do this one with when you kind of need to, sometimes it does help if you just bend it up a little bit. Yeah, so you can do that way. Hold, so put the bar through, and then you want to just kind of finesse that spring into place, and you can see there it's now locked into place. Hopefully you can see that. So now we've got the slide catch operating correctly. Okay, so far so good then. So that's that done. So now we're pretty much done in terms of obviously everything that we need to do. So we need to obviously put the trigger bar back in. So this is where you obviously go to the other side now, and we need to remove the grip again. Remember, this is the grip that we put on just to hold those springs in place. So just undo that. Undo this side. Again, just getting the fingernail under the trigger, under the grip. And what we need to do now is we need to obviously put the bar in. Now again, on this one, you need to pull this spring out the way, which was already in the way before, and just kind of hold that with your thumb. place the trigger bar in. I find this easier to do if you have the trigger in the position where it's forward, sorry, don't do this at the same time, and then you should be able to just rest that spring into that little slot. Okay, so let's make sure that goes in cleanly. Slightly lift it up out of the way a second. Push that in. So make sure this goes in firmly all the way, and you're flush, so you want it to be nice and flush there. And you can see that the spring is in that little recess. It can be a bit fiddly, but if you feel that you can have a little bit of movement here, so I'm not very far from the camera, then you know you've got that spring in the right position. And obviously this needs to remain completely flush here. So once you've got that in place, you can get the retaining sort of clip, and then this is the one where you just rest this on here, and you should be able to tell if you've got everything good, because this should sit here nicely. Now there is a little bit of lube needed here because this does obviously slide on this, so I was going to put a very small little bit of lube on there. So what you'll find that these two surfaces do have contact, so just put a little bit of lube there just to ensure that you don't need a huge amount. I'll just lift that off a second because I probably put a bit too much on there. So you just want to make sure there's some on that surface. Just keep it like that. Okay, so let's get rid of some excess. Again, you don't want to go too mad with the lubrication on this. You just doesn't need it. Once you've got that in place and everything's flush, you can then return obviously the grip itself. Make sure it obviously sits on there and don't see anything sort of getting in the way. Once you're happy with that, you can then obviously go ahead and reinsert the screws on here. So it's going to go screw these down. You don't want to go again too tight on these, because the tolerances on these mean that you can pinch the grip up on the mechanical parts. I've noticed that as well, stops it from sliding back. So a lot of these movement parts here get caught with the grip if you make it too tight. So you just want to just nip it up just a little bit just to hold it in place. That's all you need. Okay, so now we can return our focus to the bit at the top here. So we have the little plastic housing. So again, you want this thing to have the cutout here aligned obviously with the kind of, oh, I think we may have obviously jumped the gun a little bit, so I think I might have to remove, yeah, okay, so I'm going to have to remove this cam again. Sorry, I went a bit too far forward there with that one. Just take that out a second. So slide a little plastic housing in. You need to kind of make sure it stays flat and then pushes up, so it just seats there, so that's nice and flush. But obviously, as I mentioned, I jumped the gun a little bit and I've done it again, so let's go ahead and just pull this back a bit, because before we do that we need to reinsert the screw. So let's go ahead and do that. So pick up the screw, and obviously you've got this little spring washer as well. Now this can be a bit fiddly, so you might have to take your time with this one and make sure you get it directly. So it's going to go down into there, so I'm just going to push that in. Sometimes you have to kind of spend a bit of time on this to get it lined up, but it looks like it's okay. So screw that in, and again, don't over tighten it, just nip it up enough. Once you've got that done, then you can then slide this cover back over, and that will seat hopefully just right in there. You may need to get a screwdriver in there just to pinch it up, as you heard it click. So hopefully you can see that, and then we can put the cam back in. So again, you want to do this so it's away from the pin, and then you can push through from the other side and obviously rotate the camera around to the point where it needs to be to return the slide. Okay, so then let's go ahead and return the slide. So again, on here, now what you also want to do on lubrication wise, you notice that most of your maintenance will be on these positions here where the slide runs, and you can get a little bit of lube on here. You don't want, again, too much, just a very small amount, and then just cover the areas where you've got contact, and you can see the contact by seeing the wear. So you just want to put a very tiny drop in. You know, this is just like a gun oil, but it doesn't have to be a gun oil, but just enough to sort of give it, stop it from obviously catching too much. Okay, so to return the slide then, again on the runners here, comes back over. You want to be careful here that you want to make sure the slide lock and everything passes okay. And again, as it comes over, you might want to check to make sure that all of the pins are actually not protruding. So just take your time, bring it back. Make sure everything fits in. Okay, and then looks good. So then we'll rack it. Looks good. Test the trigger. And you see the trigger returns. So we should be good to go now. So let's try trigger to pull, and there we go. Fixed gun. Okay, so you know, you need to obviously sort of like perhaps remove some of the excess lubrication you had when you did the kind of reassembly. But that's pretty much it from the point of view of obviously putting the trigger in. You know, it's relatively straightforward fix. You just have to be a little bit careful obviously when you remove some of these parts that you don't have some of the springs pop out. But it's certainly definitely doable, and obviously you know you can get replacement springs from the guys at Bagnall and Kirkwood, or any other sort of like supply you had. I did try to get these directly from Umarex. They sent me an email back saying check out one of our distributors, but obviously I tried a couple and didn't get a response. But obviously the guys at Bagnall and Kirkwood come through would obviously do the replacements pretty quickly. I think I got them within kind of 4 days or so, so it's reasonably quick. Anyway, that's that done. So hope you guys found that useful, and if you did, obviously put a like, comment and subscribe, and as always, catch you next time. Bye for now.